Glenn and Bessie Hyde were an adventurous young couple whose honeymoon adventure in the Grand Canyon became the stuff of legends. Their journey was meant to put their names in the record books, but instead, it became a mystery with more twists and turns than the Colorado River itself. Glenn was born in Idaho in 1898 and grew up working on his family's farm. An experienced outdoorsman, he had previously built his own boats and navigated wild rivers, and in 1926 he ran the Salmon and Snake Rivers in Idaho. Bessie, born in West Virginia in 1905, had an artistic bohemian streak. She was a poet and had even tried her hand at theater and art. The two met as passengers on a ship traveling to Los Angeles in 1927 and felt an instant connection. At the time, Bessie was unhappily married to another man, but she obtained a quick divorce the following year. Just one day after her divorce was finalized, Bessie married Glenn on April 10th, 1928. For their honeymoon, Glenn proposed an ambitious journey. He would build a custom boat, and together, they would run the rapids of the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. If successful, Bessie would become the first woman ever documented to navigate the Grand Canyon in this way. But this intrepid duo wasn't planning on breaking just one barrier. They were planning on setting the record for the fastest navigation of the Grand Canyon by boat. Beyond the thrill of exploration, the couple saw this journey as a path to fame and fortune. They planned to write a book about their adventure and go on a lecture tour recounting their exploits. In the late 1920s, such daring exploits captured the public's imagination. Charles Lindbergh had recently flown across the Atlantic, and adventurers were celebrated as heroes. Glenn and Bessie hoped their river voyage would catapult them into that pantheon of explorers, and at ages 29 and 22 respectively, the newlyweds eagerly set out to make their mark. On October 20th, 1928, 6 months after their wedding, Glenn and Bessie launched their honeymoon adventure. In the town of Green River, Utah, Glenn had constructed a sturdy 20-foot wooden flat-bottomed boat suitable for heavy rapids. Local rivermen remarked that the homemade craft looked ominously like a coffin, and warned that few amateurs attempted the Colorado's rapids in such boats. Undeterred, the Hydes pushed off down the Green River, which feeds into the Colorado, aiming to reach Needles, California by early December. Only about 50 people had ever navigated the entire Grand Canyon by boat at that time, underscoring the audacity of their attempt. The first weeks of the voyage went relatively smoothly, especially given the difficulty of the voyage and the fact that Bessie was inexperienced in rapid river conditions. Glenn's river running experience and careful preparation paid off as they traversed Utah's Labyrinth and Cataract Canyons and entered Arizona. But the Colorado River in Grand Canyon was more formidable than anything Glenn had seen. In letters to his family, he described the rapids as longer and fiercer than those he'd encountered elsewhere. The journey was not without scares. At one point, Glenn was tossed out of the boat, and Bessie had to pull him back in, and another rapid nearly swept Bessie overboard. Still, by mid-November, the couple had traveled over 200 miles and reached Bright Angel Creek in Grand Canyon, achieving a remarkably fast run for the era. That said, they no longer had any meaningful chance of breaking any speedrunning records, which changed their plans slightly. On November 15th, 1928, with the most dangerous stretch of river still ahead, Glenn and Bessie decided to pause their river trek. They hiked up the Bright Angel Trail to Grand Canyon Village on the south rim to resupply and rest. During this brief layover, the Hydes drew attention. They were interviewed by a reporter from the Denver Post, and their bold trip was noted by tourists and locals at the canyon rim. The famed Grand Canyon photographer Emery Kolb welcomed them into his studio at the rim. Kolb had twice run the river himself and knew its perils well. He took a now famous photograph of the couple standing at the canyon's edge on November 17th, 1928. Observing them, Kolb noted that Bessie appeared worn out and apprehensive about continuing the journey. He also observed that Glenn was extremely exhausted, but determined, perhaps to the detriment of the couple. Emery Kolb urged the newlyweds to postpone the rest of the trip until spring, and even offered them additional safety gear, such as life jackets and inner tubes. Glenn refused all assistance, insisting he and Bessie were strong swimmers and determined to finish the trip without such help. According to Kolb, Glenn declared, quote, "I'm going to do it without life jackets or else," a defiant statement that in hindsight sounds foreboding. It appears that they didn't take these basic safety precautions under the belief that it would make their story more sensationalistic after they had completed the trip. On November 16th, they met a wealthy adventurer, Gilbert Sutro, at Phantom Ranch and agreed to give him a short ride downriver. Sutro rode with Glenn and Bessie for a couple of days, and on November 18th, 1928, they dropped him off at a location called Hermit Camp. Gilbert Sutro would be the last person to ever see Glenn and Bessie, and the Hydes continued downstream into the canyon's isolation. Glenn and Bessie never arrived at their destination. They had expected to finish their voyage and meet family in Needles, California by early December. When the scheduled date passed with no word from the Hydes, concern rapidly grew. Alarmed by the overdue newlyweds, Glenn's father, a man named Rollin Hyde, launched a vigorous search effort almost immediately. In December 1928, Rollin traveled to Grand Canyon and organized multiple search parties. Experienced river runners, including Emery Kolb, the photographer from earlier, and his brother Ellsworth, joined the effort. Rollin also enlisted experienced Native American trackers to scour the canyon rims for any sign of the couple. Such was the concern that the U.S. Secretary of War was convinced to authorize an aerial search of the Grand Canyon, a dramatic measure in those days. On December 19, 1928, an Army aircraft scouting the canyon finally spotted something: the Hydes boat, adrift in the icy Colorado River. It was floating upright in a calm stretch of water near River Mile 237, not far from the end of the Grand Canyon at the Lower Granite Gorge. A few days later, on December 24th, Emery Kolb reached the abandoned boat and inspected it. Mysteriously, the vessel was in good shape. It hadn't been smashed up as one may expect in a fatal rapids accident. The boat was upright and undamaged, merely holding about a foot of water inside. Even more puzzling, all of the couple's supplies were still neatly stowed. Glenn and Bessie's personal belongings remained strapped in place. Their food provisions, cooking gear, and blankets, even their coats and hiking boots were still in the boat. Amongst the other significant items found aboard were Bessie's diary and the camera containing photographs of their trip. Nothing appeared amiss, except for the fact that Glenn and Bessie were nowhere to be found. Searchers combed the area for clues. They discovered footprints and a campsite believed to be the Hydes' last camp, around River Mile 225 or 226 near Diamond Creek. The diary recovered from the boat provided a tantalizing glimpse into the final days of the journey. Bessie's last entry was dated November 30th, 1928, nearly 2 weeks after the Hydes were last seen by Sutro. In that entry, Bessie noted that they had successfully cleared the rapid at the 231-mile mark and were likely ahead of schedule, having regained lost time. The fact that they had regained this time may have meant the couple was taking further unnecessary risks in an effort to make the story more media-worthy. This suggested they had survived many days beyond November 18th and navigated some of the canyon's hardest rapids. By all evidence, the Hydes had been making good progress and were within about 40 miles of their goal in early December. One possible clue came from a canyon prospector who reported seeing a brown leather jacket floating in the river around the time of the Hydes' disappearance. Bessie was known to wear a brown leather jacket, raising the grim possibility that she had been tossed into the water. That said, the jacket was never recovered, and that clue ended up amounting to nothing. Despite exhaustive searches by land, air, and water, no bodies or definitive traces of Glenn or Bessie were ever found. The official investigation eventually concluded without a clear resolution. No remains meant no way to say for certain what happened. Investigators presumed the couple had met with a tragic accident in the canyon. In the absence of other evidence, authorities believed that at some point in early December, the Hyde's boat struck hidden rocks in a rapid near mile 232. It's believed that this forceful strike ejected both Glenn and Bessie into the cold, swift river. Given that neither had worn life jackets, the strong currents could have quickly swept them under. On paper, the Hydes were declared dead by drowning, but the lack of concrete proof left the case frustratingly open-ended. The disappearance of Glenn and Bessie Hyde made headlines and captivated the public in 1928 and 1929. Here was a daring young couple who ventured into the wild for their honeymoon and simply vanished. Newspapers recounted their adventurous spirits and the enigma of their empty boat. At a time when Grand Canyon expeditions were front-page news, the Hyde's fate became one of the great unsolved mysteries of the American West. The story's elements, romance, adventure, and an unexplained vanishing, would continue to spark curiosity and conjecture for decades to come. In the immediate aftermath of the failed expedition, most people accepted the simple explanation that Glenn and Bessie Hyde had suffered a fatal mishap on the river. Park authorities noted the treacherous nature of the rapids at mile 232, which had a history of wrecking boats and was considered the likeliest point of disaster. However, the very mystery that made the Hyde story famous also invited speculation. With no bodies recovered and some puzzling aspects, like the boat being undamaged, alternative theories began to circulate in the years following 1928. Even early on, those close to the case pondered different scenarios. Emery Kolb, who had been among the last to speak with the couple, theorized that perhaps disaster struck while they were scouting a rapid on foot. River runners often walk along the shore to examine dangerous rapids before running them. Kolb speculated that one of the Hydes might have slipped into the water and the other jumped in to attempt a rescue, leading both to be swept away. Glenn's father, Rollin, had a different idea. He wondered if the couple might have encountered trouble with a rapid, decided to abandon the river, and tried to hike out of the canyon on foot. In Rollin's scenario, Glenn and Bessie could have gotten lost in the wilderness and died of exhaustion and exposure in a remote area. However, search teams never found footprints or tracks leading away from the river, which some believe makes this unlikely. Rumors also took hold, and with Emery Kolb playing such a prominent role in finding the boat, some whispers cast suspicion on him. These unfounded suspicions gained little traction until many years later, when a grisly discovery on Kolb's property would revive such talk. But I'll come back to that in a moment. Others looked to the Hydes themselves for answers. One dark theory suggested that perhaps Glenn, described by friends as determined and occasionally stubborn, might have lost his temper and harmed Bessie during an argument. Conversely, some speculated Bessie might have grown desperate to escape the perilous journey and slain Glenn. Both of these ideas led down the rabbit hole of theories that either one of them may have escaped and lived out the rest of their life under a new identity. Decades passed, yet the story of the Hydes refused to fade away. In 1971, 43 years after the disappearance, a startling claim made headlines and briefly suggested a very different ending to the tale. That year, an elderly woman named Elizabeth Cutler joined a commercial rafting trip down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. As the group swapped stories around a campfire near Diamond Creek, the quiet older woman calmly announced to her fellow rafters, "I'm Bessie Hyde." She told a brutal story of how she allegedly had to slay her husband in self-defense. After capturing headlines and attention, the authorities investigated her, and she was determined to have fabricated the entire thing. She was a retired psychology professor who, and I'm not joking here, said she made the false claim as a social experiment. Yeah, you heard me correctly. Elizabeth Cutler dropped, "It's just a prank, bro," as her defense in 1971. Truly, she was decades ahead of her time. But then things got even weirder. And trust me, this won't be the last time I drop that line. Another twist came to light in 1992 with the death of legendary river guide Georgie Clark. Georgie was a pioneering woman in the Grand Canyon rafting community, famous for her own river exploits. After she passed away, friends sorting through her belongings found some curious items, including the marriage certificate of Glenn and Bessie Hyde. Further, they found a birth certificate for a woman named Bessie DeRoss. These discoveries led to rampant speculation that Georgie Clark had actually been Bessie Hyde living under a new name. The coincidence of the name Bessie, the possession of the Hyde's documents, and Georgie's secretive nature fueled this theory in the public imagination. However, historians quickly noted that Georgie Clark's early life was well documented and did not match Bessie's biography. No credible evidence ever tied Georgie to the Hyde case beyond those curious artifacts, but some people still theorize the two may have been one and the same. But then things got even weirder, yet again. Meanwhile, a more concrete discovery had been made years earlier that cast suspicion back on Emery Kolb. In 1976, Emery Kolb died at the age of 95, having lived at the Grand Canyon for decades after the Hydes vanished. In 1977, as Kolb's historic studio was being sorted and cleaned, workers made a gruesome find in a boathouse on the property, a skeleton stuffed inside an old wooden box. The remains appeared to be that of a young adult male. The unknown skeleton's height and build roughly matched Glenn Hyde, and chillingly, a bullet was found lodged in the skull. This discovery spurred sensational rumors that Kolb, one of the last to see the Hydes alive, might have slain Glenn and hidden his body for nearly 50 years. Some theorized that Emery had slain Glenn after having become infatuated with Bessie. What happened to Bessie in this version of events varied, but in the end, it wouldn't matter due to a forensic break in 2008. Finally, in 2008, modern forensic efforts solved the riddle of the skeleton and cleared Emery Kolb's name. The skeleton was eventually linked to an individual who voluntarily departed the world in 1933. But it begged the question, why a photographer and river runner was keeping human remains. A dig through the historical archives eventually produced what many view as a satisfactory answer. Emery Kolb had served a variety of official roles in the region, and around 1933 he had served as a representative of the local coroner. It's suspected that Emery collected the skeleton and then improperly stored it. Nearly a century has passed since Glenn and Bessie Hyde set off down the Colorado River, chasing adventure and a place in the record books. What was meant to be the journey of a lifetime instead became a dark, unsolved chapter in wilderness lore. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy just shouting out my two other channels, Lazy Chill History and Lazy Chill True Crime. The first focuses on historical content and mysteries, while the second focuses on solved true crime cases. In October 2000, near the shores of Utah's Great Salt Lake, a pair of duck hunters stumbled upon a gruesome discovery: human remains in a marshy field. Scattered among the bones were a few personal items, including a white sock, a scrap of t-shirt, and a blue woven choker necklace, along with strands of long blonde hair. There was no identification, no clue to the victim's name. Investigators dubbed the unknown young woman Saltaire Sally after the nearby Saltaire concert venue and set out to learn who she was and what had happened to her. Detectives scoured missing person reports and commissioned a forensic artist to reconstruct Saltaire Sally's face from her skull. The reconstructed likeness and details of her jewelry were circulated to the public, but no one recognized her. By early 2001, the case had gone cold, and the young woman's identity and the story behind her death remained a mystery. At the same time, Nicole Bacoles, who went by Nikki, a 20-year-old mother from Renton, Washington, had gone missing. In 1998, she moved to Utah with her boyfriend Joel Chowden and soon gave birth to a baby girl named Chloe. Life in Utah proved difficult, and the young couple struggled, and not long after Chloe's birth, they lost custody of their baby. Joel later told police that after an argument one night in March 2000, he left to cool off, and when he returned, Nikki had vanished, never to be seen again. Back in Washington state, Nikki's family grew increasingly worried as they hadn't heard from her in ages. However, they didn't file a missing persons report, as they had believed she had simply not wanted any contact with her family. Finally, in 2003, 3 years after Nikki's disappearance, her family filed an official missing person report. By then, Nikki's body had already been found in Utah, only no one knew it was hers. The missing person case and the Jane Doe case had yet to connect, and that connection came through an unexpected scientific breakthrough. In 2008, cold case investigators in Utah tried a new forensic technique to identify Saltaire Sally. They analyzed a strand of the victim's hair for chemical traces that could indicate where she had lived. The results pointed to the Pacific Northwest region of the United States, and this was a crucial clue. Detectives refocused on missing persons from that part of the country and soon came across Nikki's name, noting her age and description lined up with the unknown victim. In 2011, police obtained a DNA sample from Nikki's mother. By August 2012, the mystery was solved. DNA testing confirmed that Saltaire Sally was indeed Nicole Bacoles. After 12 years of not knowing, the young woman found by the Great Salt Lake finally had her name back. For Nikki's family, the news was a mix of heartbreak and relief. It ended years of uncertainty. They now knew what happened to Nikki, but it also confirmed she had been slain. With Nikki's identity established, detectives refocused on tracking down who was responsible for her death. The Salt Lake County Sheriff vowed that the case would not be dropped, insisting they would find whoever took Nikki's life and bring them to justice. Determining exactly how Nikki died was difficult, as her remains were too decomposed to reveal a clear cause, but investigators were certain it was foul play. The remote spot where she was left and the lack of personal belongings at the scene suggested she hadn't gone there on her own. It appeared someone ended her life elsewhere and dumped her body near Saltaire, likely hoping she would never be found. Naturally, investigators looked closely at the people in Nikki's life. Joel, her boyfriend, was scrutinized since he was the last person known to see her. By 2012, Joel was in prison in Washington for an unrelated crime. Detectives questioned him about Nikki's death, but he maintained his innocence and repeated that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. He said they argued and he found her gone, and he has stuck to that story. So far, police have not charged anyone in Nikki's slaying due to a lack of evidence, though they haven't ruled anyone out. Another possibility considered by investigators is that Nikki encountered a stranger after leaving home that fateful night, someone who preyed on her vulnerable state. A random attacker with a vehicle could have offered her a ride or otherwise abducted her, then later driven out to the Saltaire area to hide her body. This stranger theory is difficult to prove, but it remains on the table for investigators. One eerie tip surfaced in 2012. A local cold case advocate received an anonymous phone call from someone claiming to be the perpetrator. The caller provided no details or proof and hung up abruptly. Police couldn't trace the call or confirm the story. The lack of detail, in essence, made it an immediate dead end. To this day, it's unclear if that was a cruel hoax or a genuine, fleeting confession by the actual responsible party. At present, Nikki's case remains an unsolved mystery pending further investigative breakthroughs. On April 1st, 2008, 21-year-old Skye Budnick boarded a one-way flight from Connecticut to Japan and vanished, leaving her family grappling with unanswered questions. Since that day, her loved ones have searched tirelessly, straddling 2 continents in hope of finding her. Budnick was last seen on American soil at Bradley International Airport in Connecticut. But before I go further, it's important to know a few things about Skye. Skye Budnick was a junior at Central Connecticut State University, known for being extremely shy and deeply interested in Japanese culture. She had studied Japanese language and culture for 3 years and had long dreamed of visiting Japan, though previous opportunities to study abroad had fallen through. In late March 2008, without warning, Skye made a fateful decision to finally take that trip on her own. She purchased a one-way plane ticket to Japan and quietly left Connecticut on April 1st, 2008. Skye told no friends or family about her sudden trip. Not even her very best friends were aware she was leaving. She packed minimally for the journey, carrying only her laptop, necessary identification, a Nintendo DS, and her debit card, leaving behind nearly all of her other possessions. Skye's loved ones were caught completely off guard by her disappearance. When she didn't come home, her family grew concerned. Within a few days, on April 4th, 2008, Skye's sister Megan accessed Skye's email account looking for clues. In the email inbox, the family made an important discovery. The flight was from Connecticut to Tokyo, and then on to the northern island of Hokkaido. Alongside the travel itinerary, they found an unsent message saved in her drafts folder that indicated that she was in a troubled state of mind. The combination of Skye's secret departure and the contents of her email immediately raised alarm that she might be in imminent danger. Upon learning of Skye's one-way trip, her family sprang into action. Skye's mother, Susan Budnick, and sister Megan quickly flew to Japan themselves in an urgent effort to find her. By April 16th, 2008, the Budnicks had arrived in Hokkaido and held a press conference in the city of Sapporo, pleading for the local media's help in locating the missing young woman. The family filed a missing person report with Japanese authorities as soon as they could. However, because Skye was an adult traveling abroad by her own choice, police were limited in how much they could do at first. Nonetheless, Susan and Megan were determined not to rely solely on official channels. They traversed Hokkaido following any trail they could find, doing media interviews, checking local accommodations, and passing out flyers about Skye's disappearance. During their search in Japan, the Budnick family managed to uncover a few critical clues about Skye's movements. They learned that Skye had indeed made it to Hokkaido as her itinerary indicated. She was confirmed to have checked into a small inn in the town of Noboribetsu, a resort area in southern Hokkaido known for its hot springs. The innkeeper in Noboribetsu clearly remembered Skye and provided what is now the last known sighting of her. According to the innkeeper, Skye was seen at the inn on April 7th, 2008, exactly 1 week after she left the United States. She mentioned that she planned to travel next to the city of Sapporo. Sapporo is the largest city on the island, roughly an hour's train ride north of Noboribetsu, so it made sense that Sky might head there. Unfortunately, after that conversation on April 7th, Sky effectively vanished. She didn't check into any other known lodging in Sapporo under her name, and no further sightings of her were reported in Sapporo or anywhere else in Japan. The handful of leads that the family and authorities obtained unfortunately did not yield any concrete outcome. Japanese police and the Budniks followed up on these leads, but there were no clues as to Sky's whereabouts beyond April 7th. She had no cell phone with her, and she made no known use of her debit card after arriving in Japan, leaving little for investigators to trace. In the months and years following Sky's disappearance, her case remained open, but progress was painfully slow. The story received only limited media attention, especially after the initial headlines in 2008, making it difficult to keep the case in the public eye. Sky's family, however, refused to let her be forgotten. The Southington Police Department in Connecticut maintained an open missing person file on Sky and periodically liaised with Japanese authorities. Importantly, they were able to provide DNA to the Japanese authorities to enter into a database abroad. Over time, several theories have circulated about what might have happened to Sky Budnick. Sadly, one of the leading theories is that Sky traveled to Japan as a final end-of-life trip. This idea stems from Sky's known history of depression and her own words. According to a news article from April 2008, Megan, her sister, indicated that Sky had previously spoken about traveling to Japan as one last thing to do before the end. The fact that Sky arrived in Japan, went to the most quiet and remote part of the country, and then disappeared without a trace, aligns with this theory in the eyes of some. If she did perish in a remote location, it's possible her remains were never found or never identified. However, without any physical evidence, the theory remains unconfirmed. If this is the case, there's also the possibility that Sky may be known as a Jane Doe in some area of Japan, and the pieces of the puzzle just haven't been connected yet. Another theory is that Sky may have fallen victim to foul play after arriving in Japan. As a young woman traveling alone with no local contacts, she could have been vulnerable to someone with bad intentions. Her family has voiced suspicions that someone online may have befriended or manipulated Sky into making the trip, possibly with an ulterior motive. It's conceivable that Sky might have arranged to meet an online acquaintance in Japan, and that this person harmed her or got her into a dangerous situation. Japan is generally a safe country with low crime rates, especially in rural areas, yet no place is entirely without risk. Further, this reputation for Japan being a very safe country could have backfired, and Sky may have had her guard down. It's also possible that Sky's disappearance was the result of an accident. Hokkaido's landscape is rugged in places, with forests, mountains, and cold seaside waters. If Sky ventured into an unsafe wilderness area, she may have fallen into a river or a crevice and simply never have been found. Importantly, early April on this northern island can still be frigid and snowy, and Sky was not equipped for extensive outdoor trekking by any means. And just to give you a sense of how snowy this place is, all the top snowiest cities and towns on Earth are located on Hokkaido. Further, the extensive snowmelt in the spring creates extremely dangerous river conditions. The accident theory can't be ruled out, but like the others, it lacks supporting evidence. A less likely theory is that Sky chose to disappear intentionally and start a new life under a different identity. While there have been cases of individuals who vanished to reinvent themselves, this scenario has little support in Sky's case. She didn't withdraw large sums of money or have the means to live comfortably long term. Further, Some have speculated her extremely shy personality makes it doubtful she could seamlessly integrate into a new community without detection. Moreover, not a single confirmed sighting or trace of Skye has been reported since 2008, which one would expect if she were living openly under a new identity. Skye Budnick's case remains an open and heartbreaking mystery, and her family continues to strongly advocate for her, ensuring she's not forgotten. If she's still alive, she would now be in her late 30s.